Hello, everyone. Welcome. Those that don't know me, my name is Melissa Ganitel, and I'm the creatress of the Holistic Veteran Wellness. For those the first time watching this, this page is a collaborative forum of discussing holistic modalities that soothe the mind, body, and soul. This forum is about welcoming, assisting, and reintegrating veterans home back into a place of sovereignty and peace. So those that have been following this month, it's all been about art therapy and how we can use art to work with our own emotional, mental, and physical traumas. And I've been interviewing some subject matter experts that are smarter than me, that are educated and can share more about this therapy tool. So today, my guest is Jessica Siroy, and we met last year through our own training curriculum. So I'm so excited to have you on the show today, the show, TV show today, Jessica. Jessica has a wealth of information based out of Maine, and she's going to tell her whole story about art therapy and her own personal journey. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you
Hello.
so much for hosting this forum for people to come and speak about what they're knowledgeable about and how to assist in the healing journey. I appreciate that you've created this forum for people, and I'm deeply honored to be here tonight to share, what I have in my knowledge base and my own healing journey. And yeah, I guess we'll start there.
I can't tell you how many times that I've been in the Army 18 years, and the stories that I've heard, the pain, the frustration from spinal fusions to nerve pain to traumatic brain injuries to PTSD, and soldiers just getting very frustrated on medication, telling their story, having suicide ideations. And like, I'm getting chills right now. It's just for you to come here and share something healthy, something creative, something to help metabolize it. I think it's really needed today.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you. Again, I can't express enough how important this is for veterans in particular, but also for just the wider general public. There's a lot about, a lot of understanding of how we work here in the West is medical model. And the medical model is very important in a lot of situations, but it's not the whole story. And I think that's the most important message I kind of want to get across tonight is that there are many ways to get to a place of healing. And it's complex because as humans, we're really complex. And it's the mind, the body, and the spirit. And addressing only one is not going to help a person heal into their own wholeness again. You have to take a multi-dimensional integrative process of different tools, and the tools are going to be different for different people. And so I want to kind of lay out a framework from my clinical work around that, and then I want to talk about just my own journey of healing from a chronic pain nerve condition that I suffered with for about 9 years. And it really brought me to not only the training that I've done to be who I am as a professional, it informed so much of how I came into the field of clinical art therapy. I'm a trauma therapist. I'm a clinical art therapist. I also do energy work and a number of other healing modalities as a therapist in private practice here in Maine. So I don't know where you'd like me to begin, if you just want me to launch in or.
Well, just like a little bit of exploration. Why go to an art therapist, and why at the clinical level? Why not just do, like, have my art here in the background? Like, what's the difference between doing the art here and the container that you create in a clinical setting, and the importance what you add to that?
Yeah. So there are two ways of kind of using art as a modality to heal. Art as therapy, and that is sort of just painting what you feel you want to paint, drawing what you want to draw, building what you want to build. all of it is very valuable in tapping into another level of our experience. Our creative mind has a different way of putting things together than our logical mind. And so when you are doing art as therapy, it's accessing a different part of our brain that helps to regulate our systems. And so art as therapy, no matter what you're doing or how you're doing it, is really imperative. And it's a self-soothing tool. It can bring a lot of just internal peace, using color and light and the interaction of the two of them. It's bringing online a different part of the brain than our logical side. So it's incredibly healing, just like music, any kind of creativity. It opens up a different line of information basically to us. And through the process, we enjoy it. And then we realize, wow, I just lost myself for many hours. And it's very soothing in that way. Clinical art therapy is very different. It is not about painting a picture or making a drawing, or it is really about being trained in certain materials in order to regress people into an emotional state where they can access information about an experience. So oftentimes it's not a pretty picture. People say to me, well, I'm not an artist. And it does not require you to be an artist. It really is about my clinical training has given me the ability to diagnose mental health problems for people through directives in art therapy using certain materials. So that's the really important differentiation about making art as a self-soothing strategy versus making art to access repressed emotion or emotions that's just you can't put words to. We have a lot of experiences in life that we can't necessarily formulate all of our experience of what we feel in our bodies, what we might, we can't put a language to. And so different materials will help us access that information. And that's where clinical art therapy becomes a really critical tool. It's in addendum to talk therapy, but what it does is it accesses your internal language and makes it external. So once we make it external, we can have a discussion about what showed up in the imagery or what we call as art therapists is directives around the exploration of whatever subject we might be talking about. So it's giving me an external snapshot of how it feels in you. And then we have a processing component where we begin to tease apart what's really in the image and what's really coming up for the person. Doing art therapy, we have a lot of somatic experiences. So sometimes we find ourselves like, all of a sudden you're having a pain in your shoulder while you're talking about the image. You're feeling really hot. You're getting very anxious. There's a direct mirroring of not only what you are describing externally, but what you're actually physically experiencing in the moment, which actually provides another level of therapeutic intervention. So it's complex. And it's really beautiful because the other part of this is that it takes the internal, external, and there can be a separation from you and it. Okay. Oftentimes we decide we're a certain, we have a Western medicine and the medical model has a way of pathologizing people. And what can be very difficult about that is, oh, I'm just an anxious person. Well, no, you suffer from anxiety. You are your own person. Anxiety is something you're suffering with. And when you can see it outside yourself, it creates a level of division where you begin to no longer identify with what might be going on, which can be a helpful tool in healing it.
Wow. So if I'm understanding this it sounds like if somebody, because one of the biggest things I know that I'm going to hear is, well, I don't want to come and I don't want to talk about everything again. I don't want to rehash my experience while I was deployed.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you're allowing that person to bring onto the canvas what's really deep, and then let's explore that. Am I understanding that right?
Correct. And the beautiful thing is that our psyche it does protect us from what we are not ready to face or deal with. So you may draw the same image 15 times and explore it all of those 15 times. And then the 15th time, it might really register what is going on. And that's because the psyche protects us from being too exposed too quickly when we're not ready for it. And that's where I think you talked about the container. The container of a trained clinician is very different than doing art therapy with an artist. And it's not to say one is better than the other. They both have extreme value. But when we get into the nonverbal expression of our internal experience or our emotional experience, we also might not be fully prepared for what comes up. And it's very important that you have strategies to help regulate the individual who might be a little more exposed than they were comfortable exposing right away. Art therapy gets you into the healing work deeper and quicker than talk therapy. So you also have to, so the job of the clinician is to provide a safe, titrated container for that, so that more harm is not done on a mental and emotional level. And that's where having a trained or board certified art therapist or expressive therapist is really important, especially when you're dealing with trauma, PTSD, and a number of the other things that you had named in the beginning here. And it's really imperative, actually, to have the training so that whatever comes up can be managed and can be navigated, because you go quicker, deeper into the healing work than talk therapy.
Wow, I don't think there's enough of you guys floating around in the US. It seems like we need.
I agree, and it's taken a long time for the psychological community. It's taken years for art therapists the clinical art therapy work to really be seen as equal, if not as important, for a healing modality. It's very powerful work. I've seen people transform their lives utilizing art therapy. And people, I often get a reflection from clients saying, I've talked about this for 20 years in therapy, and I've never gotten to what the information that I got to here. And it's the tool of art therapy. I also use something called sand tray therapy, which is using miniature items in a small actual sandbox, that you utilize these miniature items to basically show me a snapshot of what's going on internally. And it's the same process. It's an external expression, and then we explore the expression.
I never heard of that. That sounds so intriguing.
Both are incredibly powerful tools. And what's interesting is that I do have a lot of men come into my practice and they're like, you want me to play with toys, or you want me to paint with my fingers? And I'm like, yes, I do. And until you try it, let's see what happens. And very quickly they know that that's where they need to be in order to figure things out. That it's not about talking about it. It's not about reliving it in the same cognitive context. It's about exploring and teasing what else is there that needs healing.
Yes. Every time I had a veteran say, I don't want to talk about it again, or I don't want to go to sit in group therapy. And I'm not advocating that's not helpful. It's
important.
Just what I've heard, being in the military myself, the constant discussion, the not want to have the sitting in a group and rehashing everything over and over and over again. And I think also people sometimes have a hard time articulating and expressing what's really in the seed of that trauma.
Yeah. And honestly, what we know about trauma too is reliving it and retelling the story isn't actually conducive to also healing it. So what we know about, traditional therapies have their purpose, and they're very important. And then there's other things that help deepen and widen the experience to heal. And so this is where the nonverbal modalities or integrative medicine comes into play, where you can access the information just in a different way, in a deeper level of healing. What we know about interpersonal neurobiology is that when we experience trauma in the body, our cells hold a memory of it. And so even if we've resolved it in our mind, the body has a memory of it. The wisdom system of the cellular structure of the body has to release that trauma. So whether it's you haven't gotten past the emotional experience, or you haven't gotten past the mental picture you were left with, visual picture you were left with, or if it's that you're still continuing to struggle with some physical ailment, all of it is still in the cellular memory that might not be being released on a neurobiological level. So what we know about trauma on a neurobiological level also has to be addressed. And retelling it doesn't release it from the body. Things, action-oriented things do. So that's where these kinds of tools also are. It's an active, action-oriented way of releasing the trauma. And then there are other ways of discharging the memory from the body. And that is just as important, if not more so, than talking about it.
Wow, that's so deep on a
Yeah.
cellular level.
Yeah.
I was wondering, and I'm sure the answer is yes, but have you seen people come into your practice wanting to work on one specific issue and then realizing that there was some other thing that it goes down a completely different rabbit hole?
It absolutely does, because we're really good about telling ourselves, hey, I'm this way because this, and this happened to me. And when I say, okay, so let's explore that. What they discover is that there was an experience that they didn't realize was the primary root of what they might be manifesting. Say it's a maladaptive behavior. It's a behavior pattern they don't like, or they get angry every time this happens. And they think it's related to this, and we begin to cull it out, and they begin to realize, oh my God, it has nothing to do with that. I get the response from clients who are like, I've been telling myself for 30 years it was because my dad left my mom, or, and it's like, it had nothing to do with that. So then they're conscious of what the initiator was, and then we can deal with that. We can process that, and we can help heal it. So it's in some ways making the unconscious conscious. And sometimes the stories match up, and sometimes they don't. So it's a really beautiful tool in that way, because you may have convinced yourself it's for this reason, and it might not in fact be that reason at all.
Yeah, because you have that logical side of the brain rationalizing, is it like telling this story, and then you get that creative side opening up.
Right, because we need to understand our experience. So it's important that we have a story or a linear way of conceiving our experiences, but that's not the whole truth. And that's where the nonverbal expressive work becomes really critical to understanding the other half of the truth around your experience.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really beautiful work.
Well, I think this is a great segue to share your experience and your journey.
Sure. So, God, I guess it's around 20 years ago now. It's been a long time. And it's interesting to come back to this experience, but I fell and broke my ankle, and I shattered it. And I was in an icy driveway. I fell really badly, was the original incident. I was in fact coming out of my therapist's office at the time, and I had been discussing something very difficult that had happened to me in my life. And I slipped on the ice. I broke my ankle. I had always been an athlete. I had, lots of broken bones as a kid, being a pretty active, athletic human. And I had always cut my calves off early, never had a problem healing. And I broke my ankle. I had 2 back-to-back surgeries. Metal went in, metal came out. And I was having this constant chronic debilitating pain. And after the first 2 surgeries, I really felt like I was describing what was going on, but the doctor wasn't really meeting me with where I was at, saying that it's this burning pain, it's moving up my leg, I get this burning, shooting pain. So at that point, I reached out to resources that I had within my own family that took me down to Boston from Maine. I felt like maybe I just need somebody a little more skilled to help me figure out what's going on. And on that journey, there were, again, 2 more surgeries trying to resolve the pain that I was experiencing. I was on, for almost 3 years, I was on walking boots, crutches, and recovering from surgeries. It was, and I was a young, 20-something-year-old, where I just couldn't understand why we weren't resolving the problem. They just kept going in with surgeries thinking that that would resolve the problem. And finally, after the 4th surgery, I sort of said to my surgeon, hey, if you can't, it's clear to me that you're not the person to help me solve the problem. So please get me to where I need to be. So that was when I was turned over to a neurologist who diagnosed me with, at that time, it was RSD, or complex, it's now labeled complex regional pain syndrome. So in the original injury, I had damaged nerve, okay? And it was the kind of nerve damage that would crawl in your body. So over time, with it untreated, it becomes harder to treat, and it follows nerve lines and can mimic that pain anywhere in the body because it's part of the neurological nerve system. So I spent another 6 years trying to resolve this chronic pain. Now, I was young. I had debilitating times where I could barely work. I chose not, in the beginning, they had me on pain meds between surgeries. And then the sort of result was, hey, you're going to have to live with this the rest of your life. This is an incurable condition. And, you're going to have to be on, pain meds. And by the time that they started introducing those, I quickly knew that there was no way I could live my life sort of in a haze, and not really present, on pain meds. And, it's the thing about pain medication is that you become, what's the word I want? Over time, you grow your tolerance. Okay. And then you're on like insane amounts of pain medication. And I just knew that that wasn't going to be the right choice for me. And so I remember the day they had put me on a new nerve medication. And I remember just being like, something in me just knew that I would be on a really bad trajectory if I followed this path. And I drove to Boston and I said, this is not an option for me. We need to figure out another game plan with what you've told me, that non-curable, life-altering, it's going to be my life of dealing with this. So we then went to nerve blocks, and they started in the ankle, they started in the knee, and then they went up the leg, because at this point it was crawling up into my hip section. So it was going from the ankle all the way up on my right side. And it wasn't getting managed, and it continued to crawl, and it's burning nerve pain. I mean, very uncomfortable. Some people have this externally when they have this condition, where they can't have fabric on them or wind. It's a very serious condition. I don't want to minimize like the seriousness of it. And it changed my life. I mean, it was very difficult to be in pain all the time. It affected my finances. It affected my relationships. It affected my relationship to myself. I mean, it just, riveted my experience. And so we finally found the solution of nerve blocks in the spine. So I would drive myself down to Boston midweek, and I would have a 15-inch needle stuck into my spine, and I had to be conscious because I had to be conscious for these treatments. They would basically inject a blockage so that the pain wouldn't be communicated to the brain. And I would do this every Wednesday for 3 months, and I'd have a month off, 3 months and a month off. And over time, we would build periods of time, of pain-free times, but it was not significant enough. So this was my reality for almost 6 years of doing these pain blocks, which was really tough. I would have to stay overnight, drive myself home. I couldn't hold a full-time job, because this was the reality of what I needed to do to manage this, or at least that's what I was told, and that's what I believed. And it was too scary to think of the alternative of letting this take over my whole system and what my life would really look like. I was already suffering a lot. So during this time, that was just my reality. It's what I did. It's how I showed up. Most people didn't know anything was really wrong with me because on the outside I looked fine, but on the inside I was suffering significantly. And over this period of time, I came into a pain-free period. I think it was about 6 months at that point. I was in a pain-free period. And I was like, oh my God, this feels so good. I can't believe we're getting there. And like, hopefully, maybe I won't need these treatments the rest of my life. But, let's see there's after 6 years of doing this, 3 months on, month off, 3 months on. So at that point, my father passed away. And that was we were very close. We owned businesses together. And he passed away. And it was the moment that I knew I needed to make a life change. And the grief of that was the impetus for me to put something I had put on hold for 10 years, which was I knew I was going to go back to school for my master's in clinical art therapy at some point in my life. And during the 10 years prior to that, every 3 years, I would write to this school to get their catalogs. And I looked at other schools. I knew at some point, I knew I wasn't ready for it, but I knew that was going to be my next level of education. So when my father passed and I was in this pain-free period, I went, now's the time. It's now. And I found myself out to New Mexico from Maine to do my clinical training. And of course, within a month of me arriving out there, the pain condition came back full on. And I was like, am I going to have to travel back and forth to Boston? What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to manage this out here? This bad idea, but I was enrolled in school in a 2-year intensive program. And so what began was seeking alternative ways to manage this pain condition. On top of the nerve pain condition, structurally, my body had physically gotten into all of these holding patterns. My hips were out of alignment. I had lower back issues. I could barely walk a block around my apartment because there had been, 4 surgeries in 3 years, crutches, walking boots. I mean, everything was sort of a mess. I was a total mess. On top of the pain issue and getting that managed. And so slowly but surely, what ended up happening was, as I began to train and learn about grief, loss, and trauma, and the neurobiology of how that affects the body, I began to explore other ways of healing my body. And some of the tools, so I did have a friend whose family had moved out to New Mexico that I grew up part of my childhood with, and they became a resource for me for alternative medicine. So I found a Feldenkrais therapist, and that's spelled Feldenkrais.
Oh, I think I have heard about that online.
It is one of the most phenomenal, if you have pain and structural issues, it is one of the most phenomenal tools for people to recover with. It's a neuromuscular and skeletal integration to healing. It retrains the body how to move from the skeletal structure, which is how we are actually intended to move. And it retrains the memory of the neuromuscular memory of the body. So not only does it train the body to move properly, it helps the body release holding patterns that aren't supposed to be there. And of course, when we're injured, we placate. We hold in a certain way because we don't want to feel that jarring pain, right? And so we begin holding patterns that actually complicate the body's ability to heal and move properly. So Feldenkrais became a very prominent part of my journey, returning to healing my body. What it also does is it teaches you micro movements to retrain the body's understanding of how it is supposed to move. So, you know, I definitely grew up, I'm a staunch New Englander. If you're not bleeding knuckled, you are like lazy. Okay. So I had to, so my constitution was to, you know, I mean, the harder, the better. And what Feldenkrais taught me was actually that is going to cause more suffering for what I had going on. And it was a really hard constitution. I mean, I grew up in a hardworking family. I started working at 10 years old. It was expected. This is, there were some pretty deep rooted ethics, work ethics in my family. And, if it's not worth doing, don't do it, like full on. You gotta give it your all. And so that was hard because I wanted to run a race while my body's all a mess. I wanted the healing to happen, and I was going to do anything and everything to get there, and not wait for the body to tell me how I needed to heal. And so Feldenkrais helped me unpack that. I began to structurally reorient my body in a way where it actually could heal, because it was working against the ability to heal. So Feldenkrais was really pivotal. Oftentimes physical therapists are trained in Feldenkrais. And so sometimes you can get insurance to cover it if they're also a physical therapist, but otherwise you pay out of pocket for that, because it's one of those unfortunate, amazing healing modalities that aren't covered by insurance, unless you're in a physical therapy center, which oftentimes, and that's how I did the first year of physical therapy. Feldenkrais therapy was under the guise of a physical therapist out there. So that was one modality. What I began to also understand was the information I was receiving in my clinical training through art therapy and trauma training was understanding how to turn on kind of the wisdom system and cellular intelligence of the body, because the body knows how to heal. It knows what to do. It's just sometimes we get in the way of getting the wisdom from the body to do what it's actually intended to do. I mean, we create life in our bodies. We come out with fingers and toes, everything in order. It's pretty amazing. It's got an amazing intelligence system. And sometimes it's just giving it the right tool in order to regather the information it already knows. So I began with Feldenkrais therapy. I also began some other things. I would do massage to assist the body. I did something called sound healing. Now, depending on how broad your thinking is, I'm an energy worker. I understand that we are energy. We happen to be in a human form, but we're spiritual beings. Some people might disagree with that, depending on your faith system. But what my experience was, is I began to understand that I was bigger than my body, that I have an experience that is also outside of my body, and the spiritual aspect of me as a person. And what I began to understand was we have frequencies to our bodies, to our ability to heal, and the cells have a different frequency in order to heal. And so I began a journey also during this time. I was desperate. I was willing to try anything because I was in debilitating pain. I was in the middle of a master's program that was rigorous and intense, and I was trying to heal my body. So it was a lot, but I was also willing to try anything and sort of be open to being shown that maybe there's a different way. How the sound healing journey began was, my Feldenkrais therapist said to me, I have a woman here in our practice that I'd like you to see. She's a sound healer. And I said, what's a sound healer? Well, she plays instruments or sings to your body. And I thought, as a New Englander, I was like, no, I'm not paying for somebody to sing to my body. I was like really resistant. And then I was like, what do I have to lose? And I remember kind of thinking in my head, like, this is so far out there when this woman began our session. And I started, I was doubting it. I was poo-pooing it in my mind, because, it's like, my constitution sort of had something to do with that. And then all of a sudden I felt these energetic shifts in my body. And I actually, pain areas started releasing. And I went, what? This woman's singing to me. What is going on? Like, I was shocked. And I had to put my pride aside a little bit, because I was definitely, in my pride of like, this is not going to work. This is so, woo-woo, if you would. I dislike that word, but it's, many people can grab a hold of that one. And all of this stuff started happening in my body. So I decided to, pursue it a little longer. And I started working with her. And then I ended up with a woman who actually has a crystallized water bed with a sound system below it. And you lay on the water bed, the sound system comes up through the crystals in the water bed, and you wear glasses that flicker different neurological light strobes into the brain to access the neurons and neural networks of the body.
Wow.
Amazing tool. Amazing tool. I worked with this woman who had this tool, and my body was very receptive. And what I began to understand was that when we have many traumas to the body's memory, it's almost like we build a plaque, if you will, like a plaque of traumas. And what started to happen through the sound healing work was I started to bring my nervous system octaves down. I had been functioning on this hypervigilant, hyper aroused state of being for quite some time, not only from the original injury and the medical journey of that, but from childhood physical injuries that were unresolved, from other emotional and physical experiences I endured in my childhood that also were stored in my nervous system. So as we regulated my nervous system, I began to release all of these old holding patterns and pains that I had in my body. The first time on this sound healing table, it was as if a sonar was placed in every single injury site I'd ever had. I had a wrist break, I had a arm break, I had a knee fracture. It went into each spot and it acted like it was like a sonar. There was like this pulsing, painful pulsing from the vibration, and then a release. And it literally, I had the experience in my body where it tracked into every single injury site and did this. And then all of a sudden, all I tasted was like a metallic metal. So my body was releasing the toxins or the stored toxic stuff into my body, and I was actually tasting it. It was a phenomenal experience. And that was where I was like, it relieved arthritis issues I had, chronic, stiffness and pain. And I was like, there's something to this. I can't ignore it. It resolved pain problems for me. So I continued on that journey, working my nervous system to help regulate my nerve pain condition, but it was resolving other pain issues I was having at the same time. On top of this, what I began to also include was my art therapy. So I was learning how to be an art therapist at this time while taking in all this information. And I began drawing I would draw, actually outline, I'd have somebody outline my whole physical body. And I would then draw and fill in how I experienced myself in my body, my pains, my discomforts, feeling disconnected from parts of my body. I would literally draw it on my large body drawings. And if I didn't have somebody to outline me, I would actually just draw a little figure on a piece of paper and fill in areas with color pencil, or sometimes it was nails, sometimes it was tacks. It was just different materials that helped me express what was going on physically in my body. And as I began to do that, I started to recognize that there were repetitive things happening in certain areas. And as I started to pay attention to my drawings, and again, it was relief to just get it out. Sometimes people feel like journaling is really helpful. It's the same idea. I just get it out of my body. It was how I felt in my body, so I just put it on paper. And then I began to recognize patterns of things like, you know, things being, you know, maybe really chaotic in the color red over here. Or, you know, I'd start seeing, you know, I kept wanting to put tacks in a certain area, you know, glue them on because that's how it felt in that area of my body. And what would happen is I would then take them and show them to my practitioners who were working with me and say, there's something going on over here. I don't know what, but I want to explore that today. And what would happen is it would release something in another area of my body that we had been working to try and fix. So I'd have like a massage therapist working over on my left hip forever and like trying to get this thing to release. And then all of a sudden we discover on a cross section of the body from my body drawings, when we focus there, it would release what was happening in my hip. So this whole communication system started to be revealed to me through the process of using the art therapy as a way to get in touch with what was going on with my body. Because let's face it, when you're in pain, you don't want to be connected to your body. It stinks to be in there. It sucks. It hurts. It's not comfortable. So the last thing you want to do is actually be in connection to your body, but it's actually where the information lies. So it was a combination of all of those things. I also worked with a shaman who did medical healings, and he would come to my home and do healings on me. Sequoia Trueblood, amazing man. I'm incredibly grateful for the healing meditations he would do and the healing he would do on my body. As well as some other energy healers. Acupuncture was not a tool for me. I had adverse reactions to it for whatever reason. And it was tried at many different points in time. I'd be convinced because practitioners wouldn't believe it wasn't a good modality for me. And so now I've tried enough practitioners where it's just not a tool I use. It's highly effective for a lot of people. It's not one for me. And so part of also this journey is about recognizing what is for you and knowing it, and not letting an outside authority tell you it's not, it's what you have to accept. And I think part of the journey was reclaiming my authority and what I was doing and why I was doing it. And not just following the path because that's the path they told me to follow. Okay. I had to discover what was going to really work for me. And I had to try a lot of different things. But I found my way to healing. I have not had that chronic pain issue since 2010. Wow. And this was a condition they told me I would live with for life. Recently, the one thing I did continue to have was swelling in the area, and occasionally the ankle would lock and grind. There was no cartilage left in the joint from all the surgeries that they just kept cleaning it up, thinking they'd solve the problem. Recently, I'm like getting chills. Just, I don't know, a month and a half ago, I went to see a practitioner for an acupressure practitioner here in Maine for something completely unrelated to any pain or anything. And what he said to me, he was working on my body. He said, there's something still in that ankle. And I said, what? That's been gone for me for a long time. The incident, the journey, it's been so deeply healed that I don't even it's almost like it never happened to me. and that's how beautiful it is when you begin to be curious about other healing modalities, that I've healed it to a point where I don't even remember that was my life, but it was my life. And it was a really painful time in my life. And I didn't think I'd have a way out. I really didn't. I thought, I would have to have these spine injections the rest of my life. And that was a really painful time to see my life being so young that was going to be my trajectory. And he said, there's still something in there. And I said, really? That's so surprising. And he described it as heartbreak. And I thought, interesting. He said, well, he asked me what was going on relationally in my life at that around the time. And I'm like, nothing that I can think of. But a year prior to the date I fell, there was something related to that. And in that moment, he had me do a trauma technique of breath work that fully released the tension in that ankle. And I can tell you, it's relieved the swelling. And my own doctor, who's an osteopath, felt my ankle and he said, what happened? My ankle has not felt this good since before I fell 20 years ago. And I kid you not. I mean, I couldn't believe there was still something emotionally locked in there that had nothing to do with what I thought it did. And it took this practitioner to help me access it. In this session that happened 6 weeks ago, a month and a half, yeah, I think it was 6 weeks ago. And I have not felt this great. My ankle, I mean, I've had chronic swelling for 20 years, which will in turn probably have long-term implications. But right now, not to the capacity in which, not at all to the capacity in which I've suffered with. So it's really about being curious and discovering all the layers that require an exploration. And that's kind of, I chose to find another way. And, you know, it took me on some circuitous paths, but I got there. And, you know, currently I suffer with Lyme disease, which is another thing I'm working on healing currently. And I have a co-infection with Lyme disease that attacks the nervous system. And when I was first diagnosed, I had this moment of fear come over me that it was going to kick off the old nerve condition, right? I said, I have felt it's been healed, right? And I've always said that for 10 years, that I've healed it. And I thought, oh no, it's a nervous system related illness. And am I going to experience the same thing? And I immediately worked to get myself out of a place of fear, because that's the worst place you can be in acting towards healing. And I haven't had, knock on wood, we've been treating Bartonella for almost 2 years now. It's a nasty disease in the nervous system, and I'm working to heal it. And I'm doing all kinds of things to do so. I have complete faith that we'll get there. But it hasn't brought any of that back, which really truly tells me how deeply it got healed. Because that was the first concern of my doctor when I was diagnosed with the Bartonella. So, you know, so again, I mean, it's a broad spectrum of how you can heal, and therapy is a part of it. Absolutely, therapy is a part of it, whether it be nonverbal therapy, like art therapy, or traditional therapy. There's also a process of having to grieve the life you thought you were going to have that you are no longer having. And that, I think, is the biggest piece of my understanding around trauma. And how do we really deeply heal trauma? We actually have to grieve. And the only language we have for grief work is when somebody dies. They die, we have a funeral, and that's our grief. But we have to grieve our experience all the time. I had to grieve being a 26-year-old who couldn't work, who had to rely on, who got into a lot of medical debt, who, you know, who I couldn't function. My relationship suffered because I was constantly in pain. I had to grieve all of the ways that my life got taken from me and wasn't the way I saw it going. And so that's the other piece of this, is that when we can deeply grieve, we can let go and we can accept what is, and we can build from there. And when we don't do the grief process, we're missing something in the healing process deeply, because we have to honor our experience in order to move from it. So it's a very layered story that has been my journey. And it's why I feel so strongly about the work that I do and why I do it, because I know that you can heal. You might not heal the whole physical condition. Okay. Not saying we're a miracle cure, but maybe you can get to a point where you have a few days instead of every day, or it really is just a physical thing you need to do, and all of the emotional or spiritual or cellular levels of healing have happened, and then you just have to do this one thing that maintains the physical. I don't know, everybody is different in the journey of how they heal. But I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't know that there's a whole different truth of how we heal. Yeah. I do a lot of, I have also served veterans, and it's been a beautiful process to witness, helping them drop into their experience so it can be honored, no matter what it is, no matter what it looks like or what it is. And I understand the Constitution of you are taught to persevere, you are taught to push through, you are taught to keep moving. That is the Constitution that is essential for your survival. And I think that is the hardest thing to reconcile, because somebody like myself is going to ask you to veer a little bit from that Constitution in order to heal, because that Constitution won't help you heal. It will actually help you suffer.
Wow, Jessica.
So there it is. That was a lot.
I didn't know this. I knew you had a story, but this is the first time I've heard all the details.
Yeah.
And there's so much ring of truth that you spoke to. I'm sure any veteran watching this can connect to your story of that perseverance and that tough mentality and the pushing through and all the pain that you said. I know people that have these pains and have the emotional experiences that there's things that you were talking about, like, yep, I know that person, and a lot of them, it's that sucking up. I just got to get to retirement. I just got to get to the mark, or I just got to, I had an officer, he told me when he was deployed, he said his back pain was in so much pain that his battle buddy, first sergeant, had to put on his boots every day because he was in so much pain. And amazing leader, but what do you do if you're in Iraq? I mean, so you're in that sucking up mentality, waiting for that time to you can actually relax and heal.
But you're doing more damage to your nervous system by doing that, actually. And you're actually making a more complex problem to heal. And so, and it is so hard because you are reliant on that mentality to survive. You really, truly, and deeply are in the military. And so it makes it incredibly difficult to surrender to something else in order to heal. I have deep compassion for veterans in that dichotomy that exists for them, because I think it does make it incredibly difficult to heal.
It does. And then you're talking about the other trauma that's buried in the cellular memory, things even before they came into the military. Because a lot of people that I work with were athletes. They were college athletes. They were the basketball star or the football player.
Sure.
All those injuries now coming into the military and aggressive, physically demanding environments. And it's, like you said, it's the layers of plaque, which I think is a great example.
Yeah. And the injuries may come in and you may not get injured in the military, but what you experience, witness, or emotionally experience becomes layered as trauma in the body. So then you are having all these physical manifestations because it's got to go somewhere. Right. And so it will go into the old injury areas because it can activate and manifest there, because there is no place to emotionally process it or spiritually process it. I'm sure people are exposed to things that break their spirit, that break their connection to spirit or God, if you will, because of the things that you might witness or have to do. in the honor of the responsibility you've taken. And that can split how you feel about life, humans. That can split a part of you off. And bringing yourself back into your wholeness requires a lot of different things. And that part has to get talked about, whether it be with a priest, whether it be with a shaman, whether it be, with your loved one. That part needs to be talked about, because I'm sure for veterans, they see and witness and experience things that none of us civilians will ever understand, So, and that's part of the plaque that needs healing, and unfortunately, I've had a number of vets. We've had to go to bat to get them to see me outside of the VA. And sometimes they'll have a VA clinician, and then we do side work. And sometimes some have paid out of pocket, although that's a challenge sometimes. Some we've had to write in to get approval to work with me, because the system is very traditional. Veteran affairs is very traditional, and that has value, but it also limits how veterans can access true healing for health and wellness. And so, I do what I can when I can. And being on here, thank you so much for, allowing me to speak what my journey has been on a personal level, but also, the depth of my clinical experience in order to help people to heal.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. And I love all the modalities that you shared, and the point that, you said you have to feel what's right and feel, acupuncture that doesn't work for you, but you found like there's things I've never heard about, which I think are fascinating. People just have to feel it out and feel what works. And, when you said about grieving the life that you think you had, I think that's really important, especially when veterans retire.
Absolutely.
They can't be that young 18-year-old kid running through the woods, as a sniper. Now they have a lot of injuries, physical injuries and mental issues to work through. And I think that's important.
Yeah, and it's no wonder that there's that coming back into civilian life is such a difficulty. It's like they still have to grieve the person that they were before and the person they are now. It doesn't mean that they're changed forever, but it does mean that like something has happened that has to be at least acknowledged and honored and figured out. So how do I now move forward? Just like with any grieving that we do when we have a massive loss, we figure out, how do we live without this person, right? It's like, how do we live without this part of myself that may have been lost or is wounded? That part is really important to be working through. And lots of people are scared to do that. They'd rather stay in anger, because anger is action oriented, where grief sometimes feels like a helplessness. And so, but what I know about this process, if people can go into the grief, they can reclaim a lot from there, from that place of surrender. A really wonderful book is called The Wild Life of Sorrow. It's a really great book about the levels of grieving we need to do. And frankly, we need to do them on a daily basis. Like life is hard sometimes, we don't always live the life that we envisioned for ourselves or we pictured, or we did and something happened that collapsed it. We constantly have to accept our experience and grieve it in order to fully move on. So it's a great, we don't talk about that enough. We talk about trauma, and which is important, but below trauma and processing trauma is deep grief for yourself in what you thought was going to be and what isn't, and what now can be because you've done that work. So that's the other layer of what is most important as well. So
yeah, that hits home with me with my own journey. The life that I thought I was going to have and the life I have is just, yep, it hits home.
Absolutely. It does for, I think, most people, but we don't have a language to talk about it. we don't talk about it, enough, I should say. Some people do, we don't talk about it enough. Because as a therapist, I've been in practice 10 years. That is some of the most life-changing work, is when you get into the grief of the trauma or the experiences that you've had.
So Jessica, how does people get a hold of you if they wish to work with you and know more?
I'm a Maine-based therapist. I'm in a place. It's the town that I live in is called Damariscotta, Maine. Damariscotta. My email is healingcreatively, all one word, @gmail.com. And my telephone number is 207-699-8014. So those are the best ways to reach me. I'm open, if you have a question about anything I've spoken about and you want more information, I'm happy to provide it. I love to resource people to resources, because that's how we find our way. And so, if you're looking for, if you want to find an art therapist in the state you're in, go to the ADA website, which is the American Art Therapy Association website, and click on their links to practitioners in your state. If you want to work that way. Right now I do telehealth. I do art therapy online, which is always interesting. I always say to people, what do you got in your room? Go out to your kitchen, grab some sugar, grab some spices, go out into the workshop and grab some nails, tacks, anything that's sharp, that if that's what we're working on, something that requires that. So those would be the ways to reach me, and I'm happy to help in any capacity that I can.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your story. I think it was so value added. Seriously, I'm glad that you took the time, your journey, and how you healed yourself and how you work with veterans, and really understanding the dimension, the depth to trauma. I mean, there's depth to it. And we need people like you in society helping people.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I couldn't agree more. The depth is significant, and understanding the depth and knowing where to go is really important. Another really incredible book that I will say is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. That's another really incredible book that helps you to understand how trauma gets held in the body, and how we need to discharge it from our cellular structure in order for it to not start to build plaque. It's a great tool. It's changed a lot of my clients' lives from reading it. I would say, take it slow. If you've got a therapist, work with the therapist. But it's a really incredible book for gaining more knowledge around the neurobiology piece and how we need to heal that as well. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Good to see you.
You too. I'm just going to stop the recording.